I am Dust James of Anti-Imperialist America, and my co-host for this premiering this series is David Fox. How you doing today, David?
Oh, I'm doing great. It's a beautiful day outside. It's our springtime here now in Victoria, Australia. Lovely sunny day out there, light wind, and it's actually I'm enjoying a long weekend myself. We've obviously got some time. I'm looking forward to doing this today. Obviously, we're very busy at work too. I think a lot more disputes are increasing, not just around wages and conditions, but many other things as well. So yeah, we're definitely in some interesting times.
Right on, right on. Um, so we'll just get into so this. We came up with this idea for the show, Working Class Revolt. Going to do try to do a weekly show on politics, current events from a revolutionary perspective. Um, we already got folks with us. El Suarez, a statist. Right on. Uh, I gotta deal with some technical stuff. Why was there a holiday? Why is there a 4-day weekend over there in Australia?
Okay, well, it's not completely Australia, the state of Victoria. Now, this is
Uh,
rather unique. I don't think anywhere else around the world does, but we have Melbourne Cup on Tuesday. Now, for those of you who are interested in what the Melbourne Cup is, it's an actual horse race. And all Melbourne, it's actually considered a holiday for the Melbourne metropolitan Melbourne City area. However, a lot of places recognise Melbourne Cup here. They've got their regional cups, but a lot of them do recognise it, so we have the one public holiday. And also, too, in a lot of our union agreements, and a lot of workplaces, what we have is a rostered day off. So even though we have a 38-hour week, uh, workers work a 40-hour week and have a paid roster day off once a month. So obviously we've linked that up to have a 4-day weekend. Really nice. And obviously our respective unions we work for have all decided to have tomorrow off as well. I don't celebrate horse racing. I'm not interested in gambling and that, but I do enjoy having the day off. Yeah.
right on. Well, it's holiday. It's Halloween here in the States. I think it some kind of old religious stuff to do with witches and stuff. I'm not exactly. I hear it's an indigenous holiday
Anyway,
of
mm,
of the tribes before they were Romanized in England and other places.
yeah, and I think originally it was to do with the Northern Hemisphere. I mean, it was an old Celtic, and Scandinavian or Germanic type of celebration for the autumn harvest and that prior to the winter, and obviously around that time as well. Well, it's not an actual gazetted time here in Australia, but although people do celebrate here in Australia, it's interesting because we're in our spring. We're not in our we're not in our autumn over there. But people are still out and about. They have their Halloween parties and kids love it.
Oh, they
Especially
celebrate
kids love
Halloween in Australia.
it.
They do. They
Yeah,
celebrate it
some
over there.
people. It's actually not
Yeah.
a celebration for Australia.
Yeah.
It's rather weird because, as I said, we're in our spring celebrate. But I think it's just
Yeah.
gone. I think it's just gone worldwide. I mean, kids love it. I mean, and actually, for all the children out there, that's enough lollies as well. You got too much sugar already. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, a friend of
Everybody's kind of down out here, man. It's like I went to the dump the trash guy. I was like, I thought you guys didn't work holidays. He's like, it's like, nah, we work all holidays, but Thanksgiving and this. He didn't even know it was Halloween. Like that's what the
mine.
COVID has got people, and this like they don't
Yeah.
even like everyone's like weird and out of it, depressed, and nothing's normal, and it's weird. I did see some
Mm.
people trick or treating. I was riding my motorcycle
Yeah.
around. I saw, and I'm a little worried about that. Especially here in North
Mm.
Carolina, they had a Trump rally, and I think
No.
Trump. One of my comrades here was sharing some stuff. They're all this certain comrade. I ain't gonna say which party he's with, but they're all out against Trump,
Yeah.
and
Exactly.
they're all in the streets trying to get people out against Trump. And I actually
Mm.
went up with them. I actually went up with them to go when it first started, before
Yep.
before I decided, well, you don't have to get it. But anyways, he shared something saying that Trump's rallies alone had spread thousands of corona cases.
Yeah.
It killed one politician, Herman Cain,
Mm.
the African American. I think it was in his cabinet, was killed from going
Hmm.
to a Trump rally, and it's I'm scared of
Hmm.
it. So, I mean, and it's Halloween, and that's going door to door, bringing children door to door isn't. I don't think it's the best thing to do right now. But I did see
Yes.
it, and I'd love to take my son, who's one, out trick or treating. Um, he'd probably remember it, but I don't. So he's over at my sister's house and hanging out with his cousins, and I'm going to
Hmm.
go over there after this. So we'll get right into it. So U.S. elections, I think. So I'm just going to straight out go down the line. In the title, the duopoly is a scam, and
Hmm.
I think the best thing I can say about U.S. elections is the parties represent both parties represent Wall Street. Both parties primarily represent the banking class. There's some differences um, as far as like Republicans representing lower bits of capital and Democrats more managerial capital. But at the end of the day, they're all imperialists. They're all bourgeoisie. They do not represent the interests of the working class, and there's a lot of divide.
Yeah.
Mostly
Mm.
rural America will vote for Trump, and mostly urban America will vote for the Democrats.
Yeah.
They play off of emotional, cultural aspects. My camera's getting blurry. Just gonna fix that right quick. They play off of cultural aspects. Uh, they like to use wedge issues like abortion, gender issues, gay rights, anything where the word any demand they can give people that doesn't actually represent the bourgeoisie giving actual material concessions to the working class.
Mm.
We will not get health care. They unless we fight and push and build a movement. We are not getting health care anytime soon. We're not getting basic labor rights. We're not getting our safety standards enforced. OSHA is a joke. Undocumented people are treated horribly, like second class citizens. Families are being separated at the border. No one is being allowed in the country. There's makeshift refugee camps with COVID, and there is 700 and something military bases all around the world. They are bombing 8 countries. Uh,
Mm.
this is the reality of living in the United States. It's not fun and games. It ain't all right. It's wrong. It's disgusting. It's horrible. It needs to be put an end to. And a majority of our neighbors, rural and urban, have little to no understanding of this. Uh, I mean, they have sentiments and ideas, but they don't. They put a lot of their political energy in elections, and they say, well, it's the Republicans' fault. Well, it's the rural voters' fault, or it's the urban voters' fault. It's Trump's fault. It's the Democrats' fault why things are so bad. And a lot of people don't see actually why it's bad. So, I mean, my position has been, spread revolutionary ideology, as always. And if we're gonna, and it's most important to organize grassroots labor and community organizations to actually build workers' power. That's step one. And then if we have that, then we can talk about third parties and getting third parties and pushing those third parties to do our bidding. At this point, the Democrats and Republicans are completely sold out, not only hopeless but criminal. And that's why I'm an individual, and I can say this. I'm not a journalist. I happily and proudly voted for Howie Hawkins and Angela Walker. Angela Walker is a truck driver. I think she's a queer African American truck driver living and working in South Carolina, and she's putting up her campaign while driving a day cab every day, coming home. Howie Hawkins was a Teamster. Worked in construction. There's a lot of disagreements I have with them. Um, particularly on anti-imperialism. I think they're good. They want to shut down all the bases, but they did say they did have support for the Kurds and had little support for other anti-imperialist nations. But I think shutting down the 700 bases, having a working class third party, and the biggest one at that, is enough to unite around if we had community groups. And I think they're doing exactly what Marxists should do in an election. So there's been a lot of misquotes and misunderstanding by characters like this Vosh, who said Marxists should vote for Biden, and he completely misquotes a lot of stuff that Lenin wrote. And Lenin said communists and revolutionaries should partake in bourgeois elections. But what these people are advocating is giving up our political power and putting all little political power we have directly behind the enemy party of the bourgeois parties. What Lenin advocated was our having our own party and then maybe running fusion with them and then like a coalition or something. But there was an actual socialist or communist or even a militant labor party that existed in the United States. The closest thing is that the Green, and they want nothing to do with the Democrats. We need our own party, and that party can engage and have and push them and do coalitions against the right party. We're not going to just line up behind this war criminal mass, this terrorist organization that funds the most vicious imperialist power on earth. I know that's a big speech, and that's right off the cuff. But what's your response over there from Australia? What's your response? And feel free to debate with me or however you want to do it, man. Go ahead.
I mean, looking from afar, I mean, obviously Australia does pay some interest in this because we're actually caught up in US foreign policy, part of the US Australia military alliance. We play a heavily role. We've been involved in a lot of conflicts with the US overseas, whether it be in Iraq. US, we've been involved with Syria with some of our air force as well, and various other things, and especially around with China as well. As soon as Trump started attacking China, and that our prime minister straight away went on the anti-China, all the China bashing bandwagon, and this is something I was taking consideration. Actually, I was listening to George Galloway's Moats, or Mother of All Talk Shows. He does two now. One on the Sundays, the general public one, but through Patreon on a Wednesday night their time. And I was listening to it yesterday. And anyway, what he said also in the UK. They pay special interest because also too the close relations with the British Prime Minister and Trump as well. If Biden wins, what will the relations be like? And also what will the relations be like between here and Australia? No doubt we'd still get our orders, and so it's. Likewise, I mean, it's not just simply, oh, it'll be just the same old things will continue. I also, too, what's concerning that it's going to set the precedent who either wins is going to be a massive clampdown on democratic rights for everyone. I know if Trump gets back in, there'll be massive clampdowns by military and police on the population, especially through this Black Lives Matters and many other anti-Trump type protests as well. Biden gets in, oh my God, that's just the war hawks. Well, Biden will be around for some time, and I agree Kamala Harris will step up to the mark because I think, basically, I think Biden's just so too far gone now. He will, because of his condition, he will not be able to sit a full term as a president out. So Kamala Harris will step up, obviously, and I just think, oh boy, just watch out. And she's lethal as well. More people will be in prisons. There'll be a lot more intense prison industrial complex as well. But the thing is, for us here in Australia, we'll follow that to a certain degree as well. And it'll also, if Trump gets in for Australia, like we'll talk about this further about the far right, but obviously it inspires them to bring in like the polarization that's brought into the US there. It's been sitting there undercurrent, but really under Trump, it's just emphasised it a lot more. I think for anything for the working class, so overall, the attacks are going on the working class and working class people is going to intensify even further. The way the low wage job will be more or less the norm. now on, and it's happening here in Australia as well. What we're seeing, a lot more lower wage, casualised, underemployment type work. There'll be people working 2 or 3 jobs. The working poor. It's been around for some years, but it's just you'll see it expand greatly. So anyone's sense of economic security in that will be certainly out the window. I was actually taking some observations myself with Florida, which is I believe is one of the key states to win if you're forming government over there. And all the people that are supporting Trump, and I'm just looking at them. Most of them are doing it because of their economic interest. Most of them middle class, they're well retired, well paid, that as well. And then there's also a breakaway, and they're actually getting behind Biden again. So really, all their economic interests are under threat. They're feeling under threat, so they support these things. And so that's what we've got. That's what we need to be mindful of. They're seeing their economic interests either tied up in Trump or Biden, and that's just flashed up in front of my screen. Just let me close that. Don't know why that's there. Okay, it's back, and so that's what we're seeing. What I say, I just think the attacks on the working class will intensify further, regardless of who wins government. I think it's be interesting to see though. People those who voted postal vote. I think it was led to believe there's 80 million people who've already voted, which is a substantial figure. That's actually bigger than the population of the UK. Certainly bigger than our population, and that's an outstanding figure. It'd be interesting to see who's voted what. But Harry Hawkins and the rest of them, be interesting to see the percentage and how much they got as well. So under here, and it also too, I'm just trying to work out how the whole voting systems work. We over here in Australia, we have what we got. We actually have a Westminster style government. We have House of Representatives and then the Senate. But we have a preferential voting system as well. So you number your candidates.
Ranked choice.
Yeah. So, like, say if you want Joe Bloggs and they represent the lower house or House of Representatives done by is a seat. Like I live in I think it's the federal seat of Bendigo. Interesting in town, and then also on the state seat of East Bendigo. But our federal member is. Our federal members. So if you wanted to vote for someone, that you tick them 1, and then you go 2, 3, and the person you least want, or you don't want, goes last. So you might have 4 candidates, and you go 1, 2 to Joe Bloggs, 3 to John Smith, and 4 to nasty person, horrible person, and last. So, and hopefully that goes last. So that's where we stand as well. So that's just how that works. Gives you a demonstration. But I was trying to work out how the US electoral process works. So someone shared something up on Facebook, and I think they had one.
It's electoral college. It's very reactionary. It gives the electoral college was basically enacted by the banking class. George Washington was a banker. The majority of the people who started the American Revolution were bankers. They put down Daniel Shea, a farmer who fought in the American Revolution, and then they wanted their rights when they got back home, and they realized they weren't getting them. They formed militias against the current system, and they were brutally put down by George Washington and others. And a lot of them were actually using local governments to forgive debts, and that's part of the reason why the Constitution was formed, to be able to put down these farmers' militias who were energized by the American Revolution. And the banking class has always been in control since the conception here. And to make sure the banking class stayed in control, they called demagogues or what have you. They didn't want to listen to the people. They didn't want somebody to do something for the people against the interest. So they came up with this scheme, the Electoral College. Electoral College gives more power to more rural voters. It's stayed that way. Basically, millions of votes in California do not count. Essentially, like each state has a number of votes, and they're not exactly representative of the population. A vote, like somebody's vote in North Dakota is like 30 times more valuable than a vote in California when they tally the numbers. So if you're in a red state and you know it's going to vote red, you might as well vote third party because your state's already there. If you're in a blue state, you might as well vote third party. And if you're in a swing state, you should still vote third party because both of them suck and don't represent our interest. But when you hear somebody when you hear somebody saying, "Oh, I have to vote Biden," and they live in California, it's like millions of people are going to vote for. There's like a million. There's like there's million people threshold of that state still going
Yeah.
there. You might as
Mm.
well. And well, and on the Green Party gets about 1% each year. Um, it really, I mean, that's considerable. That's considerable considering the mass media machine, the way they're shut out of the debates, the way they're took off the ballots. I was looking at, I was thinking the Green Party is doing exactly what revolutionaries should do in bourgeois elections, and that is exposing them as a sham. The Green Party was sued by the Democrats to have them kicked off of, I think, Wisconsin's ballot, kicked off Pennsylvania's ballot, and this is voter suppression. This is suppression of voters' choice in election.
Mm.
This is so the Electoral College is suppression of our democratic rights, and then the suppression of third-party candidates is suppression of our voter rights, and then you have closing down post office. You have hurting the post office, which Trump has done. But the post office has been under attack since the 70s. Back when the 70s, they had airplanes, they had trucks, they had their own trucks. They've been going, all the mail is contractor now. We got FedEx, UPS. A lot of it's being
Yeah.
privatized, and the privatizers want to shut down the post office. And the Democrats back in 2006, um, they passed a law. It was a Republican executive branch, but it was a Democrat controlled House, and I think House and Senate at the time. And the Democrats basically passed a law to sabotage the post office, where the post office had to pay their retiree plans 75 years in advance.
Yep.
Nobody has to do that, and it completely put them in the black, or I mean, in the whatever the black or the red is. It made them unprofitable, and no other company in existence has a deal with those strict regulations. And if it wasn't for that, they would have been profitable all this time. The post office is one of the best institutions we have in the United States. But I mean, and then going back to the elections, so a lot of people doing mail-ins is going to create problems. I was watching Democracy Now, and I think North Carolina, there's been a series of court hearings, and these court hearings are saying, are they going to accept these mail-in ballots after election day? And some of the state courts have been saying no, and some of them have been saying yes. North Carolina, they said yes, I believe up to 9 days. So if it comes to a tight election, the swing states, which North Carolina is, we might not know the results till 9 days, up to 9 days after the election. And then some states aren't, and they also said they could sue in court. Like, so let's say North Carolina, they right now in the court says, whatever level the court says, as long as it's postmarked by election day, as long as we get it within 9 days, then we're going to count it. Let's say they count it, and then let's say Republicans are like, you should have counted that. Republicans can sue, and that puts the whole process, the whole election finding out on hold until that court decides. They might throw out those ballots. They might reverse that decision later on with a court stay. So it could be a week or weeks after the election. I'm hoping not,
Mm-hmm.
but it's possible to be weeks after the election with no victory. And I think shout out to Caleb Maupin watching us, who had a report where he went over a lot of the problems with the elections. And he said, if this was another country, if this was Bolivia, if this was an anti imperialist country, if this was a socialist country, the United States would declare that election false and a fraud, and they would just impose whoever they wanted to in there. And I think Caleb said something similar, not to that effect. And then he was censored on Twitter. The RT site was censored on Twitter. They didn't want people to hear that. That's the case. Any thoughts?
Well, Yeah, look, I was actually just thinking when you spoke, because when I was talking to a good friend of mine this morning, I talk to him once a week as well, who lives over there in the US. He said, well, also he explained to me, well, if it came very close or pretty much even, so just hypothetically, Biden got 40%, Trump got 40%, and the rest 20%, then it has to, I think you guys then have to do another election about 6 weeks after, between those two candidates and that. And I just thought that's just chaos. Really, it is. Um, I mean, it just shows you the systematic crisis of capitalism. Because we do have to understand, well, there's a few things, but what it is, the whole thing is a reflection of the systematic crisis of imperialism and capitalism. It's quite a reflection of it. So the political system itself goes into crisis, and that's what we're seeing. Actually, the observations too, when I watched the U.S. presidential debates, and that was about, I think, about 2 weeks ago. I mean, I made some comments. I made some funny comments, and I like doing things with a sense of humour at times. And generally, I just thought, gee, the bar has just been. I just don't know how far the bar can be lowered any further. But it did, and I just thought, using the term, it generally couldn't get any dumber, but at the same time, it will. Um, I thought, oh, you poor people. I really do actually feel for a lot of people in the US. I just thought, you got the two biggest scoundrels running against each other. And let's face it, I'll kind of call them out what they are. I mean, Trump and Biden, they're both parasites. They represent the parasite class, and that's what they are. And their parties are parasitic as well. And I've just, when I'm seeing that, and I just like, yeah, it just shows you the whole systematic, that it's quite a reflection of what the crisis of capitalism is. Because I think one thing we've always got to understand is don't just focus on the personality. Yes, sure, Trump is a complete whack job. And then Biden, I mean, look, Nenley is just not there anymore in that. But the fact is, at the end of the day, regardless of who it is, it's actually they're products of the system, and they're a reflection of the system as well. And it shows you that, yeah, capitalism, it really, in a lot of ways, is on its way out. Love to go out a lot faster than what we would like it to be, what's currently going at the moment. However, and that's why it's becoming a lot more reactionary. It's trying to fight for its very existence now. I think things can move very quickly too, and which surprisingly we're going to the whole thing with this pandemic. Things have been moving actually quite quickly too with the economy and everything. And some people, not everyone, but some people are starting to think about things, question things themselves. And as the material conditions change, so does people's consciousness and thinking as well. So I think it's a lot more people are waking up. It's quite refreshing actually to see a lot of younger people as well getting involved in it. And I think for many years it was like, oh, the young people don't care, and that I think they actually do, because they know they haven't got a future under the current system they've got now, which is capitalism. And seeing Trump and Biden, you look at their ages, who they're actually generally representing. They're two men in their 70s. Either whoever wins is going to be the oldest president the US has ever had, I'm led to believe. George Galloway actually pointed that out. I think they're about in the mid 70s now. And I thought, even that too, that should be just like halt. There should be a cap too of sometimes of age as well. I'm not saying, I'm not putting anyone that's elderly down, but it's like, come on. It just, it's, you can't do all that. It should be a return. That's it, and move on. But actually, add just with that also to the appointment what was her name in the federal court judge that Trump appointed, a very conservative judge just recently in the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court. I
I
was
think
looking
it's
at it,
Amy.
and
I gotta
yeah,
look it up.
well, just looking at it, and I didn't know this until at the end. But they've actually got, they're pretty much the only time is when if they choose to retire or if they pass away. They said that the age cap for that is no cutoff. We're here in Australia. We've got a Supreme Court and a High Court as
Amy
well, and
Coney
the
Barrett. Amy
yes,
Coney Barrett. Yeah.
Amy Coney Barrett, and that's good. And we do have an age limit, 70 years age, 70 years old at the oldest, and they must retire. Um,
Hmm.
so I think I think the whole thing, yeah, it is a sham. I mean, if it, I think it's really actually the one thing though is that's really opened it up just how much of a big sham it is, and it just shows you too just how on the nose they really what the Republicans and Democrats are. They're not democratic parties at all. There's nothing democratic about them, regardless of what their names. There's nothing Republican about the Republican Party, and there's nothing. It will quickly sell its own country out. There's nothing democratic about the Democratic Party either. I mean, I looked at what happened with Bernie Sanders. He had more popular support than any of the other candidates. And I mean, look, just put our criticisms aside of Bernie and what he did, but reality is, at the end of the day, he had more support there amongst his party, but he got all the party apparatchiks, the numbers crunchers, and all that sort of do a little political game and stab him in the back and then put Biden up. So I mean, it's really in a lot of ways. I mean, a rank and file member of that party really doesn't have a say. They might think they might have a say in the party, but they don't. Their vote doesn't count. Whatever. It's the powers that be that will choose and dominate. And look, it's a reflection here too of Australian politics at times. People join parties and think, oh yeah, I've got a say in this. And the two major parties here, I mean, not all the parties, but the two major parties here, Liberal and Labor. But the fact is, at the end of the day, no. And interesting, you look at people like Trump, but even the US House of Representatives and your Senate, none of those politicians or those political persuasions are answerable to the party rank and file. You know, your common rank and file person of that political party, and the same here in Australia as well. They just do their thing, and pretty much they got control of it. And it's to say that's completely wrong as well. I mean, if you like, regardless of what party anyone joins, they should. If you join it, it's a voluntary organisation, yes, but you abide by the the party's constitution, its policies, and rules, and implement that. And that's, but not just go do your own thing. And yeah, so it just shows just how divorced everyone is from that process, and just how the gap there is between even just the common party members, but also to the general public there from US politics. And I also too, it's interesting when we're looking when they're saying, oh, you know, we're democracies and stuff. Well, really, we don't actually have a say. It's really we're alien. That's what I wanted to use the term, alienated from the political processes in a lot of those countries, in their own respective countries. In the US, I think if it was a genuine democracy, the people would be in control. And I don't think even the US would be a completely different country from what you and I know it as, and because you yourselves, because you live there. And I've said this into about Australia as well. When people say, "Oh, but we're a democracy," not quite. No, we might go to a ballot and vote every 3 years or so, or 4 years, and that. But really, it's we don't actually have control of the process. At all. It's actually controlled by one class, and that's the capitalist class. And they say, actually, just talking to about US elections as well, and it's also a reflection here in Australia. Rupert Murdoch, and just how much political influence he has in a lot of these parties. I mean, it's same here in Australia. Just on that, you know, I recently did a talk on this. Kevin Rudd, our former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, created a petition through the one of the government department where websites they can do that, which will go to it's a parliamentary website. To petition about challenging this Murdoch empire and his influence, because the influence on Australian politics has been massive. At the moment, he's on the attack against the Victorian government. He was just recently on the attack with the Queensland government, and they're both Labor governments. But interesting, Queensland had their state elections yesterday, and Labor's going to come in with a comfortable majority against sucked in Murdoch. You didn't get your way, and some of the right-wing parties actually the votes collapsed. So, and the Greens picked up a seat. So bad luck, Murdoch. Tough luck. Yeah. And anyway, but what Rudd did is brought up a petition, and over 350,000 people put their names to it, including myself. I then thought, wow, I challenged the major parties in the federal parliament. I thought, oh, you know, I don't want to touch it. But it just comes to show that we've got to not just exposing what Murdoch's up to, but also at the same time, but this is a start of a process to start challenging his influence. And I think it should be challenged. It should be actually completely destroyed. I know what he's trying to do. He's trying to make sure he's strengthen his position and make sure he's got the monopoly position on the media. So watching that, I always better believe Murdoch. You've always noticed that from prime ministers to opposition leaders to presidents that always going to have a dinner with Murdoch and basically receive your orders. Yes, sir. No, sir. Okay, sir. I will certainly implement that, sir. And then he'll get Murdoch will give him a good write up in his media.
But I think you raised a brilliant uh, description of how undemocratic the Democratic Party is, and how undemocratic the Republican Party is. The rank and file has no voice in that party. If you join the sorry, if you join the young Democrats or the young Republicans, or you join your local meetup, you're going to be expected just to push that party line all over the place. You're not going to actually have a demand. And we saw that with Bernie Sanders. Majority of Americans want universal health care, and they have used whatever political methods to stop it, to use Bernie Sanders to get people interested in the party, and then have Bernie Sanders back the candidate who would veto Medicare for all. And I think you got to take you. I like what you said about you. Elections are just a reflection of the power relations, and we currently live in imperialism, monopoly capitalism, final stage of capitalism. And I want to bring it back to foundations of Leninism. If you look in the first chapter, the two major contradictions are class oppression and national oppression. And so let's look at this. I would say that the Venezuela and Bolivia are far more democratic organizations. If you join the Socialist Party, either in Venezuela or in Bolivia, you as a rank and file member have far more representation in that party, in the power, and in the politics of your government by joining those parties. And I would argue China as well. 90 million member Communist Party. I would argue, I mean, I know how it is here. They probably have more say. Rank and file members probably have more say in that, in their party. So all these dictators and despots they call people tend to be more democratic, at least more democratic in different ways compared to the United States. So I'll bring it back to the two contradictions: class and national oppression. So if you let's look at it's obvious national oppression when it comes to trying to carry out coups, both failed coups in Venezuela and Bolivia recently. I think it shows both the inefficiency of Donald Trump and also that the empire is in decay. It is having Vietnams all over the place. Not with dead numbers, but resources wasted, being laughed out, having their coups, that little mini Bay of Pigs being stopped, Bay of Pigs being stopped by Venezuelan fishermen, the people coming together in Bolivia having a mass strike. I mentioned this repeatedly. The movement towards socialism party in Bolivia is a grassroots coalition. So not only is it a national party, to be a member of that party, you have to be in a community or labor group because it's a coalition. And so that is the exact opposite. They have lots of control. Like rank and file runs the Socialist Party in Bolivia. The exact opposite of here. So when the U.S. tries to go in there, they are attacking the democratic political rights of the Venezuelan and the Bolivian people. Black, indigenous, working class people. They're trying to stop their political rights by sabotage and by coups and outright invasion at times. The coup in 2009 in Honduras, which helped lead to the migration crisis. Now let's apply this to the United States. Class and national oppression. I live in the Black Belt South, and we have gerrymandering where even though the majority of the people in a state will support the Democrats, predominantly African American people of color supporting the Democrats, but because the way they draw the districts out, Republicans will have the majority seats. That is voter suppression. That is suppressing the political power of the working class and the oppressed nation of the Black Belt South. And you can show this all the way to California. Um, the oppressed nations and the working class is systemically had their political power taken away from them at the ballot box, from violence to the suppression of the Voter Rights Act to not allowing Greens on the ballot. And it's the same political repression of the working class and oppressed nations from North Carolina to Venezuela to Bolivia. And the imperialists are firmly in control, and they they manipulate these systems to make to make it look like we have a choice when there is no choice. This is a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, an imperialist system, monopoly capitalist system.
Yep.
We didn't get into it, but there's an argument out there that we should vote for Biden because Trump is a fascist. Maybe I'll go to you. Do you think Trump is a fascist, David?
No, not completely. No, I mean, he got some fascist tendencies, yes, but no. If he was a fascist, it would have been in completely different. It would be a brutal crackdown. Completely, it would be direct military terrorist control. You'd be having big concentration camps, a whole lot of the population. I mean, has he got some of those tendencies? Yes. But the fact is, fascists don't have to believe in even just basic bourgeois democratic elections either. They believe in direct terrorist dictatorship. And I think we've done this talk before when we were studying the history of the three internationals, William Z. Foster, and also I've explained it a few times, and I still highly recommend everyone get a hold of this book, Against Fascism War by Georgy Dimitrov. And I think explaining what fascism is, because people tend to use that term loosely, or divorce from what its actual meaning, which is actually dangerous in a lot of ways. Because I've seen all sorts of people labelled fascist, and without actually saying, well, hang on, how's that fascist? Does he support does Joe Bloggs, if someone says Joe Bloggs is a fascist, how? Does he support the terrorist dictatorship of finance capital, does he? So that's basically, understanding what fascism is. I think Trump is more ultra-conservative, but he's also neoliberal in his economic models as well. It's interesting because I've actually talked to working class people here. I always do because of the role as an organiser in the union. What happens basically here is some workers saying, well, all the great things Trump's done. He's brought back industry and that. And I say, actually, he hasn't. There's been some jobs, but they're not actually great high-paying jobs at all. But obviously, they'll talk about him putting protections on. No, he hasn't protected any industry of that. Unemployment is huge and growing in the US, and underemployment as well. But going back to what is he a fascist? I don't think so. He would have made his move a long time ago if he happened to be that type of fascist tendency. He would have marched on. Are there fascists? Obviously, fascists. A lot of fascists are inspired by him. Then at the end of the day, get behind him. But he's still allowing all the traditional institutions of capitalism to run its show.
Yeah, so, Dimitrov laid it out. Fascism is the last response of, this is me paraphrasing, I'm not sure where to find that. Fascism is the last response to save capitalism. Mm. And so there's always fascists waiting in the wings, ready to take over. But as far as I see it, the neoliberal capitalism is working fine at making profits. They have enough stability as they see it. There is not a socialist movement they're afraid of. So they're not ready to go to fascism. And I think a lot of the problems in the US left is there is no understanding on a material basis of the class question, of the national question, of the system of imperialism, and how those play out in the material conditions. A lot of what goes for socialist politics in this country is pure aesthetics. Pure aesthetics. Yes. Well, I'm non-gender conforming, and I like the Democrats, and I'm a socialist now. No, it's about class oppression. It's about
Yeah.
national oppression. It's about exploited communities. And there's a number on that exploitation. We work for this much, they take this much surplus value from it, and we want to build power and get that shit back. That
Exactly.
is
Exactly.
materialism and socialism. And a lot of what passes for leftism was, oh, you don't. Um, there's a big emphasis on gender issues. I'm not saying those aren't problems with that. There's a lot of oppression to do with that, but just putting up the aesthetics of being rebellious or being non-conforming or being hippie culture has nothing to do with socialist politics. And I think that's
That's
the
right.
problem. That's why people are calling Trump a fascist.
Yeah. I
Because
don't,
go ahead, go ahead.
yeah. Sorry, I mean, because this is what people actually interesting. Just on that, George Galloway was called a fascist because of his stance on the transgender issue, right? And he explained his position. And someone called him fascist, and he pressed that red button, gave him the alarm, cut him off from that mother of all talk shows. And I just said that's just typical of a lot of these people from this countercultural, all this synthetic left attitudes and that, and people calling anyone, labeling anyone a fascist. I don't understand. There's a difference between someone being conservative and being a fascist. Now, fascism only comes into effect if there's direct threat to capitalist class rule. And the capitalist class know full well if their position is threatened by the working class, that's when they will use it. And I just want to read this little paragraph. I read it out the other day from Georgy Dimitrov's book Against Fascism and War. He goes, fascism is not a form of state power standing above both classes, the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, as Otto Bauer, for instance, has asserted. It is not the revolt of the petty bourgeoisie which has captured the machinery of the state, as the British socialist Brailsford declares. No, fascism is not a power standing above class nor government of the petty bourgeoisie or the lumpen proletariat over finance capital. Fascism is the power of finance capital itself. It is the organisation of terrorist vengeance against the working class and the revolutionary section of the peasantry and intelligentsia. In foreign policy, fascism is jingoism in its most brutal form, fomenting bestial hatred of other nations. And just, I think if people are using these terms lightly or divorced from what they're meaning, can really confuse. And sometimes some people do use it to deliberately confuse, especially the working class people, and that. But it's not to be used there, divorce. I think it's always important for everyone listening in or watching these things to understand what fascism truly is. Is Trump a fascist? No. Is he stupid? Yes. As correctly pointed out, someone described him as stupid evil. The difference between Biden and Trump, and if someone said if Biden's the lesser of two evils, well, even those who are voting for Biden, I couldn't comprehend voting for either because you're still voting evil. At the end of the day, you've got stupid evil and you've got one that's on the way out type evil. So it just at the end of the day, it's going back to what I was saying is about fascism. Look, just asking you, understand it. Obviously, read up on it. I recommend that book, but also understand what it generally is. It's interesting when people have also said about fascism. I've had this discussion with many people, and I said, look, I know a lot of people from Chile that live here in Australia now. And if you want to know what fascism is, ask them. They lived under Pinochet, and they know exactly what that is. They know exactly what I'm talking about when I mention it, and they've experienced it themselves and that. So, is the capitalist class rule in America, are they under direct threat at the moment? Not really. No, not at the moment, because the working class is not organised as such as yet to take them on and seize power. So it's just something always to keep in the back of our minds about what it is. Is there fascist elements in those two respective parties? Yes. There were fascist elements supporting Trump. Yes, and also no doubt, and some probably get quietly behind Biden as well. It's like here in Australia as well. There are fascist elements in the Liberal National Coalition. Yes, not all of them, but a lot of them are conservative, but in their in their views and about things. But there are some. There's no doubt about it, and there's also quite a lot of fascist elements that support them as well. So just I always believe to everyone, just be mindful when using terms like such as fascism and that. And it's actually interesting when you mentioned socialism, because I know one of the big discussions in the US is about the health system having a universal health system, and when they say, "Oh, that's socialism," no. Well, then if that was socialism, Australia would be socialist because we've got Medicare here. And that we're not a complete universal health system, but to cover our basic medical costs, it's free as well. But and that's so, it's like, hey, yeah, I think some people use these terms without thinking, but there's also beware of those elements out there that use these terms to deliberately confuse people. What it is that there's a lot of capitalist countries with a universal health system. I could quite quickly point out, Scandinavia, for instance, Sweden, Norway, Finland, and Denmark, etc. So, and so
This election, talking about the election
mm,
took more time than I thought. We can get
yeah,
rolling.
I just
I don't want to go too much longer. Um, you maybe we can do a quick bit on maybe a few minutes on. You raised the point of how to deal with right wing organizing, how to
mm.
deal with right wingers. How to, did you have a statement prepared on that?
Well, actually, well, it'd be a good discussion. I think everyone needs to have a think of how we're going to deal with the far right, because it has risen both here in the US and both in the US and here in Australia as well. There was an article in Jacobin magazine the other day. It was on. I read it on Facebook. There was about the rise of far right here, and then the second biggest threat to our national security on extreme religious fundamentalism as well. So it's something to always be aware of, and I think this is why it's very important that we have to get out of the movement and get into the masses and start to engaging with working class people. Some have got some no, views and opinions we certainly don't agree with. But we need to start engaging with people and explaining, because I mean, look, hitting the streets, waving the flag, shouting and abusing people, and denunciating everyone because they don't agree with us. That's just not the way to go. In fact, all that does, people just get their backs up even further and just put the shield up, And I think we need to do a different way of life. Educating the people, the old educate, agitate, organise, and moving into it and engaging with common people all the time, and practical things like that. And also, because people have got concerns about where everything, they are generally concerned about where everything's heading. But we actually need to start engaging with them a lot more in practical activities. And I've also too led to believe is also support those organisations that actually uh, dealing with these far right groups by actually having people leave them. There's an organisation here in Australia called Exit Australia, and a couple of these people were part of the extreme right at one stage that started off with some professionals, and they realised actually they engaged with them to bring them up to basically have concern, basically educate them, to help them out from these movements. And that there's a word for it to deal with extremism, but it's a great way because they engage it and they find actually a lot of these people have got their own problems. They've had problems all their lives and everything else, and they've led from one thing to the other and all up in these extreme right groups. So I think they should be. So I think some of these organisations that deal with it. That should warrant some attention and some support there as well. But I think we do need to actually genuinely engage with people in out there. And that's why it's vitally important, because I notice, I see all sorts of comments on YouTube lives, on Facebook, and and I look. Also what we mean by getting out of the movement, getting to the masses, get off the keyboards, people, and stop being the keyboard warriors and get out and start talking to start talking to the population at large, because I think it's time. It is time to do that. And so I think it's vitally important, because one thing about when you see the rise of the far right, if that does go and then capitalism sees in them at the end of the day, the capitalist class sees in them, right, we need to deal with it, like similar to what happened with the Nazis and Mussolini, and that, by God, just watch out if they ever do come into power. So I think that's something we need to be, and that, I think the first things first. We need to actually go out there and start talking, and start engaging with the common ordinary folk.
Right on. I mean, uh, yeah, one of the only things for free around here, like if you ain't got cable or what have you, and old folks on the internet, is talk radio. It is just pure bigoted, anti-immigrant. My dad's been leaving it on and with my nephews, and my
Yeah.
my brother-in-law's pissed about it. Rightly so, you know. You know, and you know, it's a problem, and I think you got to talk. You got to see. You got to go where the people are at. You know, living in rural areas in the United States, most of these folks are against the wars. Most of these
Mm.
folks think that the rich, even you think the rich people got too much power. You can start on there and go from there. You know,
Mm.
I a lot of this a lot of this stuff the Democrats and liberals push is classism against
Mm.
rural workers. They say write them off. They say don't do anything. But there's progressive tendencies within rural workers, and they can be easily attracted to either the right wing or the left wing.
Mm.
If we build
That's right.
infrastructure and we work on talking points, we can
Mm.
convince rural workers to the side of socialism instead of the far
Yep.
right.
That's right.
And I think the last bit we had planned was a workshop on how do you talk to right wingers? How do you talk
Mm.
to right wingers? So I'm going to put Dave Comrade on the spot here, and I'm going to pretend like I'm a right winger. I'm a right winger, and you're promoting socialism, and you just told me socialism the answer. And my response is, hasn't socialism failed everywhere it's been tried? Hasn't socialism resulted in mass death and destruction? How do you respond to that?
I would actually say absolutely not. I mean, that was the socialism that turned a backward country of Russia around into, by the 1930s, had the biggest economy in the world, was racing ahead. It turned an illiterate nation into a highly intelligent literate nation as well. Living standards were being lifted big time. And also, it was that socialism as well that defeated the monstrous war machine of Nazi Germany and also the other fascist powers as well, and liberated half of Europe from the yoke of fascism. And certainly, it also played an important role as well, supporting anti-imperialist struggles around the world and freeing the people of the developing nations. It's also the same socialism that's lifted a population of 1.4 billion people, China, out of poverty. And you look at now at China, it's the world's biggest economy. It's no longer the US or any of the capitalist nations anymore. All the capitalist nations together put all the capitalist nations together, and China's still racing ahead and developing this Belt Road Initiative, where other countries are now joining onto them to have peaceful development, win-win cooperation, without this whole total drive into poverty, which imperialism, capitalism's arising. It was also the same socialism that actually liberated Vietnam away from imperialism, and also Laos. And other countries, respective countries like that as well. It's also the same socialism that is highly defending its looking after the well-being of the population. And I'm seeing now with Venezuela and Bolivia now, a great shot in the arm. Cuba as well, got the best health system in the world. They're actually sending doctors and nurses around the world to look after people. And they're actually, honestly, too, when I'm looking at Venezuela, they're racing ahead. And the people have control of their destiny. It's just amazing what socialism has done. It's not a system of
Okay,
profit
okay,
making.
hold up. All right, I got another question for you. If
Okay.
socialism is so great, why are all these people going to the United States and Europe? Why do they want to get into the heart of capitalist countries?
Good question. Why do they do that? I think, well, there's a few things. And I think, first of all, some of them that are the anti-communist, the anti-socialist crowd. That's obviously, you saw that with Cuba, obviously, but Fidel, at the time when he was alive, allowed them to leave, obviously, as well. And we also, too, saw with Eastern Europe originally, after the Second World War, the people who did leave those countries, in the Ukraine and that, they were actually fascist sympathisers, or actually fought in fascist groupings that were organised by the Nazis. And obviously, they were wanted people for war crimes as well. So you saw that. But also, to other people that tended to leave as well. And what we saw, what happened with Eastern Europe, they weren't actually campaigning against socialism as such. I think they led to believe they wanted their can of Coca-Cola and a pair of sneakers as well. I think it's also too. It's what they thought they led to believe is the influences. This is the free and the brave, and a lot more out of capitalism. Socialism has been under attack ever since its formation. And when people say, well, socialism's failed, it's oppressed, because what's happened? It's been under attack ever since the Russian Revolution, and you're seeing from then on, it will have problems because it's trying to develop and survive, but it's also done amazing things as well. Those people have actually mostly have left the socialist countries. So as I said, mind you, they're either the reactionary elements of those respective countries. Some have actually led to believe that might have been a better life in other countries, but as soon as they found out what it's like, and I'll give you a classic example, Democratic People's Republic of China. A lot of so-called defectors from the country who have either gone to South Korea, the United States has found out the whole system was, they were better off staying back where they were in the DPRK. Now they can't get back. And so to say that is impressive in that, no, I have to disagree there.
Okay, one more final question. So okay, so even if it's true that they build that the Soviet Union built all this wonderful stuff with the 5-year plans, and they invented space travel, and China has lifted millions of people out of poverty, aren't they responsible for genocides and mass murders? None of that counts, does it? Because they're evil, right?
What genocides and mass murderers? That's what I've got. I mean, this thing about the Uyghurs in China, that's actually what they're actually developing. They're actually developing that region, helping the Uyghur people lift their living
What about
standards.
Hollendor in the Soviet Union?
Yeah, well, the whole lot. I mean, the fact is, in the day, if you're looking around there, the people referring back to the 1930s and period, the Ukraine or the 1920s, was there a famine there? Yes, but that wasn't because of socialism, because of climate, of the drought and that. And of course, obviously, every country that gets droughts, we don't have that. We don't have next to nothing growing crops either. And also, too, it was starting to develop at the time. The Soviet Union just came out of a civil war. It was trying to rebuild, and obviously it had to actually prioritise things. It had to feed the population. And mind you, they were still dealing with hostile classes in there. They were trying to accumulate grain like the kulaks were, for them to profit even more. They've obviously, and obviously when we're talking about genocides and that, well, actually the biggest for a system responsible for any genocide has been capitalism, right through in its inception. Was there a peaceful time where the transition into socialism? No, certainly there were some things that happened. And during the 1930s, everyone going about the Stalin period, this deep dark time. Yeah, look, the honesty at the end of the day, that wasn't because of socialism either, and it wasn't because of one individual. No, there was a time when there was attacks on the Soviet Union internally. You had the opposition there. There was a lot of sabotage happen. And look, like you and I, if we go out and carry out sabotage or some sort of terrorist activity, I'm pretty sure the authorities would want to get it rounded up pretty quickly and thrown into jail for a long time. And so, I mean, that's certain things that have happened there, and obviously it's been difficult as well. It's not to say it's been perfect and rosy red, but at the end of the day, it's been fundamentally a lot better for the vast majority instead of the very few. And obviously, too, a lot of these things about Holocaust and that were actually developed by Western media, and explaining that socialism is this horrible state. I remember when I was in primary school, I used to listen, and no one was allowed to pray in Soviet Russia at all. If you were caught praying, you went to the gulag straight away. And we've got to understand what a gulag is. It's just a prison farm. We've got prison farms here. People went to jail. You do the wrong thing, you go to jail, basically. And that's what happened. And or the break the law, you go to jail. And that's what's happened. I think some of these things about genocides and some was big myths, but some of it was quite mythical, and it was just actually based on untruths, and there's a lot of it's imperialist propaganda. At the end of the day, we've got to have a look as well. With the Soviet Union, for example, yes, 27 million people did lose their lives. How they ended up? World War II. 27 million people died because of World War II. And what the imperialists did, they looked at what the population of Russia should have been around by the end of the 1940s, instead of actually taking into account World War II and other things, imperialist invasions, the whole lot. So, yeah, and then they try to blame it on one leader or the system itself. I think that's a completely incorrect thing to do.
Right. Well, that I put you on the spot. And I think you handled it very well. And I
Mm,
think the comrades Washington need to prepare themselves on those
mm,
three questions in particular. I've been trolling right wing groups for
mm,
years now, and this seems to be the three questions. And I think I'll restate the three questions and add to the great responses that you've given. The first myth. They say socialism has failed everywhere it has been tried. No, the Soviet Union um, lifted people out of poverty, electrified the country,
mm,
industrialized, had unprecedented growth, became a world, went from the most backward country in Europe to a world superpower in a matter of decades, was destroyed in World War II. And then they did it again. After being
mm,
destroyed and masses of the population fell, they became a world superpower again through massive, unprecedented growth that is only accomplished through socialism. That socialism is superior to capitalism. China has its economy has grown three times that of the United
mm,
States for the last 30 years. China has lifted is it millions or billions? Astonishing amount of people out of poverty. China is investing in infrastructure. China is growing way faster because of the superior system of planning the economy, not the anarchy of
mm.
profit. The next question: why is it that people are immigrating to the core imperialist camp? Why are people immigrating to Europe? Why are people immigrating to the United States? Well, the U.S. imperialist system has destroyed the third world and purposely keeps the third world in poverty. As
Yeah.
Fidel Castro would say, where is the success of cap? They say socialism has failed, but where is the success of capitalism in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia? Haiti is a capitalist country. Honduras is a capitalist country. Puerto Rico is a capitalist country. And they are
Mm,
starving and they're fleeing because of capitalism. And the
mm,
final question: well, there's been genocides and mass murders. How was the United States started? Slavery, genocide. Every day, thousands of children die from starvation because of capitalism.
mm,
Capitalism, the global economic system, causes mass migration, causes famine, causes war, is causing the current genocide that's going on in Yemen because imperialism is funding and backing the Saudis.
mm.
Those are 3 points
Yep.
that I think me and you went over very well. And I think
Yep.
when you see these things in your life, with people you see or online, these are responses that the trained socialist revolutionary can come point for point, be ready to go after, be ready to bait, and change the cult, to change the understanding.
Yep.
Throw out the myths and the old ideas, the old order, and bring about a new society of socialism. Any
Well,
final remarks? I know we're a little over.
yeah. Look, well,
Go
just
ahead.
one last thing. How socialism works really well. COVID-19. China got on top of it straight away. They actually warned the whole world there's a new virus out and a lot more stuff. And they're doing everything they can now to try and come up with a cure for this virus. Cuba, another one where it's working as well. They got right on top of it straight away and now trying to assist other countries in dealing with COVID-19. And Vietnam, population of 94 million. How many cases they had? I think they're lucky to have, I think, a couple hundred. They got on top of it straight away. They actually looked after their population. It wasn't as business as usual, looking after business interests. It was looking after the well-being of the population. In contrast, your country, the US, I mean, it's just like COVID-19 is just rampant right there. In Britain, Europe, elsewhere around the world. So when people are saying socialism not working, well, hello, there you go. That's just a classic that shows you capitalism is the one that's not working. Well, it's working only for the capitalist class, not for the rest of us. And so always keep that in the back of the mind as well. And just so you go, when they're talking about genocides and stuff, just remember British Empire. You had the Irish Holocaust. You had hundreds and thousands, millions of people die in India, Africa. Also, nearly wiped out the indigenous population of Australia as well. You know, look at also two other countries that were imperialists: the French, Germans, the West, etc. And just look how many people were caught in genocides there as well. So that's a classic example. If there's anything been genocide, it's been under capitalism and imperialism.
Right on. I think I'll just give a shout out to everybody that commented: Estes, Alice Suarez, Caleb Moppin, BT Inc., Estates, Jason Serrana, I Am Sudan, Ecoist, Estatists, Bennett Lloyd, Bing 4, Kami from Hawaii, and Huey Long. Thanks for joining us tonight. And same time next week.
Yep. The same time next week. And thank you once again, folks. Coming in, well, I know one of you has made a comment about Julian Assange, just briefly, but we do have to finish up. But I will put this in. It is disgraceful that the Australian government hasn't done enough to try and help out Julian Assange. He is an Australian citizen, and it's actually just not just tragic. It's actually a shame and a disgrace as well. Needs all the support in the world. But look, we can talk about that further next week if you like.
All right. Good night, everyone, and thank you.
Thank you, people.